Well, I think if I did
Oh, I
this,
see.
and he'll-
You want the video in there too?
No, it's all right.
Okay.
I can post that in. I can overlay that and use that slideshow to, yes, I mean, that's the way to go. There's an opportunity there I haven't figured out yet.
Okay.
She thinks I have.
So this understanding the possible origin and the value of our lore. I think the value of our lore is something that is more often than not understated. Just as soon as someone comes along and finds their way into this, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people yank the rug out from underneath their feet by saying, well, the lore should live in the Christian knowledge. It's not really about it. What are we supposed to go on? We're supposed to make it up as we go. And that's what a lot of people have done. When somebody says that to you, when you come in and you meet someone you respect that has a positive energy, that has a good mindset, that is moving forward in life seemingly, that seems to have a clear way, and they look at you and they say, well, the Lord's too heavily Christianized, it's very difficult for the new person to take a look at someone and say, well, I'm not really sure you know what you're talking about. It's a very confusing, and it's a challenge it's one of those challenges that we're facing. And it says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, we've tried the way of faith and tried the way of no faith and found that neither has worked. And I think that a lot of new heathens, when they come in, find themselves in that boat. So I began to take a look at this. This all started with a train of thought that originated from winter nights 2 years ago up in the Poconos. I was coming back and I was listening to a book by Graham Hancock, the new one. And Randall Carson, I checked Randall Carson's work out. And I began to see, having written probably 30 books on the Lord, I began to see some very interesting parallels between what they were talking about and what's recorded in the Lord. This is a challenging thing to put out. Most people think, oh, well, it was put down in about 1,000 by Snorri, and he was killed and blah, 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 and he sold out. Yes, he did sell out, but he was also the presiding judge of the all thing. And what he documented was what he knew and what he understood. This concept suggests that this lore is much, much older than that. And I, for one, really think that it is. Now, the opinion of the amateur historian, which is admittedly what I am at this point, usually takes the etymology of words entirely too far. And more often than not, they miss the fact that the majority of Grimm's work was wrong. It didn't go the right way, they got it incorrect, and we're still working on a lot of it. I think there's a book called The Wheel and the Donkey that does an excellent job of clarifying a lot of that. But then at the turn of the last century, you had a book by Saussure entitled The Religion of the Teutons. And it goes chapter, name by name, the men, the work they did to keep this lore alive through this heavily Christianized era that was almost eradicated the thought process that we have what it takes to succeed in this world. Now, those amateur historians will also tout Beowulf and the rune poems in a heartbeat, as if these stories offers an example of how to act or maybe the thought process of our ancestors. But I personally look at Beowulf and the rune poems as that painful transition where the greatest efforts of a pagan king were not sufficient. That he was a failure when it comes to these temptations, and that such and such had to come in and slay the dragon and free the kingdom. Those are stories of transition. Those are stories that begin the vilification process of being a pagan, being a heathen, being those men of the world who were supposedly ruled by primal lusts or whatever. And they were not capable of dealing with original sin. And they are not competent to handle the authority contained within them. Those stories are the slow, poisonous death of the insides of men, and a pointer along the way whereby men became convinced that the greatest part of themselves originates from outside of their being, instead of relying upon gifts given to us by Odin, Vili, and Vang. So that, having said all that, there's a thought process in there that coincides with geological changes. Things that happen on this world that I'm going to point out to you, we're not We live in a very, very comfortable time. We live in a time where we can eat greater than a king of this time by simply going to the quick trip. We can enjoy feasts those people can't begin to imagine. And yet they still had to deal with cataclysms we can't begin to comprehend. So we're going to discuss the reason why the Lord is still around. Number one is an outline of silence. Number two, it's a mindset to survive him. And it's going to be a brief history of what happened. If we look at Lief and Liefers, Life and the Love of Life, which is the title of that book, we find two people who are sequestered, not only as people, but also as ideas in the tree of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil also being known as the Kenning for ship, we will address that in a minute, and the gallows, the death of the ego, when Odin hung in the tree, to make their way through time and disaster, which has been a part of history of the world. So here we have these two individuals, this concept, this life and the love of life, that are sequestered inside the world tree, that emerge after disaster, after Ragnarok, after these great destructions that hit our world again and again and again. And it works in that mindset as well, but it also works on the individual level. When we, through our own actions, through our beliefs, when we put these obstacles in front of ourselves and our own thinking brings us to a crossroads that robs us of everything we might love. Men who have been incarcerated, men who have endured hard times in service, women and who have lost children. When we lose our grandparents, we have thoughts and emotions we're trying to deal with. What emerges after that? What emerges from our being after we have to deal with those great Ragnaroks of everything we hold dear? It works at that level too. Life and the love of life. You've got to find it again. The runes are a key part of that. But we're going to stick with the great cataclysms for today. What are they? Are they a set of ideas, a transfer of knowledge from one age to the next? And that transfer of knowledge can be traced by the events which caused it to move people around the face of this planet. So let's take a look at this. These are auction isotopes agreements. This is 1500. The start of the Pyramid Age of Egypt, the birth of Jesus, and interestingly enough, somewhere in here was a comet that the idea of monotheism. You see Akhenaten with the red disc in his helmet, this was that comet. And at that same time, in the Mayan civilizations in Southeast Asia, in Egypt, the idea of this one great disc shining in the sky, brighter than the moon and rivaling the sun, birthed this idea of monotheism at that time. That fell away. It fell out of disuse in Egypt again, and then in Central America and Southeast Asia once the comet disappeared. But at that time, it caused an issue. This is the average temperature for, this is thousands of years before the present. This is our average temperature. All right, 1 or 2 degrees above or below. We keep that oxygen isotope ratio -35. This is the mean temperature of the times we live in. This is a 1 or 2 degree temperature deviation. This is what we see in the ice core. So we've had this stable time to live in. But that little dip right there, that little dip right there, they're going to be recorded as cataclysmic events by the people who live in it. And they appear as mini ice ages. And there are 2 phases. There were mid-1300s, we warmed up for a century. In the 15 and 1600s, glaciers grew and the temperature dropped. Bigger than they had been in 10,000 years. They began to warm about 1850 and the glaciers began to recede. And we're seeing now is continuation of that. We're still dealing with it. But in around 320, a Swedish king, Demalder Visberson, he was sacrificed. So for 3 years, his kingdom suffered. This is about 320. There were multiple failures of agriculture, there was famine, and most certainly death. The first year they sacrificed oxen, which is a hell of a sacrifice in a time of hardship, to sacrifice the animals that are going to work the earth. The second year they sacrificed men, slaves, whatever. And that's an even harder sacrifice to make because those are the people that are going to make the production. The times are desperate. And the third year they sacrificed the king. So for 3 years, the environment was such that they couldn't do anything. The king sacrificed himself, blah, blah, blah. The country returned to prosperity. Now, 200 years later, we find a similar tale. And we also find the reason for it. The little ice age coolings of the 6th century, 536, 544 AD. This is the time of King Arthur. Okay? The land had succumbed to blight, it become a wasteland. They needed divine intercession. He was sick and in decline, and the land reflected that. Now, there was a dendrochronologist named Mike Brown who studied the tree range from trees of that time. And during this time of the Grail Quest, for about 8 or 10 years, his name is Mike Bailey, he showed that there was a serious global cooling. Tree growth stopped. Weeks at a time, the sun was not visible. There were multiple collapses of agriculture. People became malnourished. Then there was famine. They developed a weakened immune system. In 542 AD, the Justinian plague came through and wiped out a quarter of the population of Europe. Cold, collapse of agriculture, and then plague. It took Europe 300 years to recover from that. And yet somehow, through all of that, and the advent of Christianity and the wars that go around it, these knowledge of what we're holding to be true came through that. Now, that's not the only time it happened. 300 years later, as it warmed up, about 900 AD, the sea ice began to retract. Things began to warm up. I don't know if you can see it on here, but maybe right in here. No, hell, it'd be up here, wouldn't it? Sea ice began to warm up about 900 AD. What happened about 900 AD? You began to get the Viking explorations. The sea lanes became free of ice. People could travel again across the seas. It warmed up, sailing routes to Greenland, Iceland, Great Britain, and the Americas. Agriculture rebounded. There was lots of food. People increased in height 4 or 5 inches from the Dark Ages. Now there was wealth. Population expanded. And after 150 years of warmth, European society began to build cathedrals. Thousands of well-trained craftsmen worked on this activity. They show up in a geologic instant. Who organized this? Who trained these craftsmen? They just originate out of nowhere. There's a transfer of knowledge there that we're not paying attention to. The consequence of the expansion of wealth from warm weather, and then it stopped. The early 1300s, the little ice age we talked about, at that time was the onset of the little ice age. There was agricultural collapse, there was famine, and then the Black Plague wiped out another 1/3 of Europe. So we see a pattern in our recorded history. From 320 to 500 to 1300, we're dealing with this repeated cycle. We're not paying attention to it. This is what the land masses, this is the land that was exposed in Europe during the last glacial maximum. Sea levels were 400 feet lower. Now, granted, that ice kind of went through here, but you could walk from here all the way over to here. There was enough land mass exposed when the last glacial maximum happened that it covered it. It was the same size land as all of Europe and China combined. All of these rivers still run out into the ocean. And if you're a civilization, where are you going to put your city? You're going to put it at the mouth of a river where there's easy access to the interior, where there's plenty of game and fish, and life is good and life is easy. But when they start to rise, you're going to get legends like Atlantis. And there are 5 that I know of sunken cities. Matter of fact, there's one right here at the Nile. You can look at that online all day long. There's no question that it's there.
They've also found another, like in Ireland, the Stonehenge.
Yeah.
They found
Oh, yeah.
older ones that were way before this, and it was
Exactly.
during this time period
Exactly right.
that are now covered with the ocean.
This lake was here, but this is the sea ice, or this is the glacial maximum. But this is Wessex, this is London, this is about here, here's Ireland, not covered in ice. You can follow the Elbe River, which is where my ancestors come from, and walk over here to across Doggerland, and there are settlements and stuff all over this area that we know nothing about. Who knows what wonderful treasures and secrets of the past are there. Most assuredly, we will find a connection between the faith that these people enjoyed and the faith that we have today. This is what Ice Age Europe looked like. all heavily glaciated. Now, the reason this isn't is because the Gulf of Mexico currents are keeping that warm enough to grow crops and people to live there and so on and so forth. That's where Stonehenge is. This is the rest of that chart of oxygen isotopes. This is modern era that we're living in is 18 degrees warmer than what it's been for the last 150,000 years. You have a warm up here, you have a warm up here. This is called the Younger Dryas event. This is a common event, 12,500 years ago. Then it cools down, then it warms back up again, and it stays warm. We live in an era, the reason we live in such a comfortable world is because of global warming. And this is 18 degrees. They're stressing out about a 2-degree increase. We have a timeline which is 8 degrees warmer than it's typically been on Earth. That's the sudden emergence right there from the Ice Age about 12,800 years ago, and that's the beginning of the Younger Dryas event. Now, the reason I tell you all of that is to show you this. Oh, that was so dramatic and it failed at that moment. This is the Columbia River. Kennewick Man was found down here somewhere, right? Just south of here, north of where the magnificent flood entered the Columbia River. That's where Lake Bonneville burst its dam. This is Dry Falls in Oregon. This is about 5 miles across. And this is, what do you know guys know what that, those are dry falls. Can you imagine what it would take to build something like that? Huge, huge event. This was made. The geologic evidence suggests that this great destruction, these huge falls that are 5 miles across, happen in about 2 weeks' time. Now, another clue that we have is that everything dies. In that Younger Dryas event, 35 genera of megafauna went extinct. 95% of fauna that has existed on Earth over time has been extinct. We're the lucky few. This is the worldwide ice and exposed land masses. This is what we're looking at. So if we have an exposed land mass and an ice sheet, and then we have more land mass, it might be a lot easier to get across that if they're 400 feet lower, I would think. You know, it might be just as easy to get across that as it is to get across this and then walk across a glacier. Now, I have done glacier training, and I was an instructor, Northern Warfare Training Center at Fort Greely, Alaska. And I was ready to train the trainer course, and we took each company out there and we got on the ice. I'm telling you right now, you can't walk across an ice sheet that's 2 miles thick. It's not going to walk across it. You're traveling in 3-man road teams. There's an element there that these Stone Age savages are just not going to traverse that. More importantly, why would they? And I think that's the important thing we've got to wonder. Why would they leave this wonderful grassland with plenty of game and come across this challenging coast? Or why would they leave here to go here? Well, in 320, we know it's because they were starving to death. In 540, we know it's because they were starving to death. This is the ice sheet. This is Beringia. This is this huge land mass. And this is how there's supposed to have been a crack right there from the path for everybody to come on down. This is the Laurentide ice sheet, the Cordilleran ice sheet. With the sea, this is what the exposed land mass would look like, 400 feet lower. Now, let's go back to that Dry Falls. The volume of water was so significant that created this. You couldn't escape this unless you were in space. This was created by a tidal wave approximately 1,250 feet tall.
Wow.
All right? This erratic, these are, and we know it was 1,250 feet tall because all along this channel, all along the edge, the boulders contained in glaciers that broke off of that ice sheet that washed along that tidal wave. And as the icebergs stuck on the side of the mountain, those things were resting there. And you can see them all over the Oregon Scablands. See these ripples? These tidal ripples, and that's what they are 40 to 70 feet high.
Wow.
These are the tidal ripples of the floodwaters of a hurricane. So we're talking about destruction on a scale we can't begin to imagine. This is see this whole channel here? Those great dry falls that are 5 miles across are right there. So this all came through here. It's just one small part. 5 northwestern states were underwater. These ice dams broke again and again and created these channels for that tidal wave to flow on. But something much larger created that. Idaho, your Snake River Canyon. You had the Velas Crater, New Mexico filled up and burst its dam. You had the Great Salt Lake fill up and burst. So all along the edges of this glacier in North America, you have these great channels of floods and destruction. And the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute has determined that on the north side of this, into the Arctic, there's this same evidence of the same kind of destruction. So it's pouring off this huge ice sheet that's 2 miles thick and destroying everything in its path. And Kennewick man was found here, and he was like 2,000 years after that. So there was something living here, but it was destroyed in a great flood. How would that be recorded? What would that look like? The Snake River average annual discharge is 56,900 cubic feet a second. During the flood that created this canyon, the discharge was 40 million cubic feet per second, all at once. Filled up Lake Bonneville, the Great Salt Flats, busted through there, Snake River Canyon to the Scablands out to the ocean. Down in New Mexico, you have the same thing going on. What would cause something to fill up and do that all at the same time? Well, obviously 3 or 4 days of good solid rain are going to do it. This is the Bandera. Across the west, you have this. This is Niagara Falls. It's taken 10,000 years to build that. This is part of that great dry falls that I showed you, this 5 miles across, that happened in 2 weeks. You could not have escaped the destruction that happened that created this unless you were out of your glass comet. The Voluspa says, fast move the sons of men, and fate is heard in the note of the Gower horn. Loud blows Heimdall, the horn is aloft. In fear quake all who on hell roads are. We are all on hell roads. We are all moving towards that door of death. The sons of men were the tides of water. Yggdrasil shakes and shiver on high the ancient limbs, and the giant is loosed. To the head of men does Othin give heed, but the kinsmen of Ser shall slay him soon. And the kinsmen of Ser, the scourge of branches, this is fire that you can get into. Ser fares forth from the south, the scourge of branches, the son of the battle gods, shone from his sword. Crags are sundered, great canyons. The giant woman sink, the dead throng hell way, and heaven is cloaked. It's killing thousands of people, great crags are being carved in the earth. The sun turns black, the earth sinks in the sea, hot stars down from heaven are whirled, fierce growth the steam, the life-eating flame till fire leaps high about heaven itself. So when this amazing amount of debris up in the air, it's ash and water and mud, and it's enough to fill up Lake Bonneville and the Velas Crater and the Banderas Crater and create a tidal wave to wash through all of that lake. And who's to say it's not recorded right there? But there's more. It's not just that passage. So we have, this is just one instance, mind you, that some kind of magnificent geologic change has hit the earth to the extent that it's been recorded. You can look at mythologies all over the world, and they will record these kind of events. This event left evidence all across the northern hemisphere. This number 16 right here, they found a crater last week the size of Paris. It struck right there. Now, if it broke off from here and bounced over there, because it just went all the way across, that's the crater field. And all across here, they have isotopic evidence that this was a big event. This affected the entire northern hemisphere. This would have been carried down in legend as old women sat around fires and told young children growing up in the village, if Ragnarok's already taken place, what we're living in is that time of golden fields. Now what do we do? These are the locations of the fragments from younger Dryas Comet, and we pass through the remnants of it twice a year. The comet that caused this, this planet passes through that debris field in space twice a year, and we call it the Leonid and the Taurid meteor showers. And we all go outside hoping to see a shooting star, but I promise you, this ain't what we want to see, okay? But Rome, in 250 BC, they talked about having a problem with hailstones. And when they talked about hailstones, they're talking about comets. So now we're looking at Haggalas in a new light. Now we're looking at that radical change that Haggalas represents, this hailstone on not only your farmer's crop, but also in a civilization aspect. Now Haggalas takes on a whole new meaning. When we look at Rome calling it a problem with hailstones, now we got something much bigger to work with. A comet may well have been responsible for monotheism. Comets recorded around the world around 3500 BC, like I was talking about earlier. Another comet around 1180 BC led to the downfall of Egypt. The new research talking about the sea peoples, these sea invaders, so often referred to as the fall of Egypt. The pictures of these sea people are not pictures of boat people as warriors. They're pictures of a warrior with his family and his 2 children and his livestock. They were immigrants. They were people fleeing some kind of destruction. And there's a huge body of evidence, and it's all written down in cuneiform and Greek and Crete between the king of Syria and the king of Crete. It's all there talking about, it's been dry here. It was dry there for 300 years. Those people had to leave. Egypt never recovered from it. About 250 BC, we get a powerful clue for our own ruins. Comets had been an issue for the empire that year, and they were referred to as hailstones. I understand that. Got ahead of myself. Now, that leads me to some. Ta-da! There it goes. One of the cultures that we know was destroyed by this is the Clovis culture. Now, when that comet hit, that's going to frustrate me. Hang on, guys. I apologize for this. When that comet hit, it threw up other things into the air too. If you look at the North American continent, everywhere you have a Clovis culture site, it's about that far below this layer of black mat. And that black mat is the ash of continent-wide forest fires. So not only is it flooding across the Northwest, now you have continent-wide wildfires burning out of control everything that's going to burn. Now I want you to imagine a farmer standing there with an antler-handled implement fighting a forest fire to protect everything that he loves. And all of a sudden we have an image of Frey fighting Surt. And it's carried forward in the legend, and he becomes deified. And he's a god because he's deified. He's God because we deify him. It goes both ways. But there's another legend that starts there. And I can't get the rest of this to work. This is frustrating me. Give me just a second, guys. That's also recorded in the Voluspa. So when you look at that, that's an interesting connection. And if you look at our Voluspa, if you look at our lore, and now all of a sudden there's the reality that some of this might have a legitimate recording. Now all of a sudden we're not sitting here just making something up. Now all of a sudden we have a path that might literally mean something, that might move us forward through time, that might, just might, prepare us for when it happens again. Because one thing is for sure, if you look at that chart, if you look at history, you look at the common impacts on the world, I'm talking about just the common impacts, it will happen again. So we are at a point in time, and who's to say all of us, that 1.5 million pagans in the United States have decided that they are not going to rely on someone else to do something for them. They've decided that we have what it takes in here. This is life and the love of life emerging from whatever we've been through. You have to realize that not only have we had to deal with these tumultuous, cataclysmic, if I can say that right, destruction of the earth. We also have the mind of man himself, killing hundreds of millions of people in the name of political ideologies and religions.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I love it.
It's a shame he wouldn't let you use that for your book.
Oh
cover.
man, I know, it just, he probably I suspect he had a break with his faith. This is the Clovis culture. These are the locations of the Clovis culture sites of Clovis Point. Now you find Clovis Point in North America, but you also find in Europe. Okay? This is, and I tell you that for a reason. These are the 57 locations where one or more of the Black Mass of the Younger Ice Age occurred. Below that is where we find Clovis culture points, where we find these societies. So all over this area, this is where that ash of the Great Forest Fire was. None here because it was all flooded, but all through here. And over here, we don't really see very much. These continent wildfires, like I say, as soon as I heard about that idea, I got the idea of a farmer with an elk handled implement fighting a fire to save his family. And I immediately thought of Frey. I'm gonna throw this out here for you all to consider. These are X2A. This is the haplogroup. See that Great Lakes region and Newfoundland region? And they say that that arrow went that way from the Mediterranean, from England, from Iceland. This haplogroup is kind of unique. Why would you be doing this when there's a continent-wide wildfire, when there's a comet that has struck and destroyed most of it? Why would you be going that way? Could be wrong. I don't know. Haplogroup X. So here we have this great destruction about 12,000 years ago, and then Göbekli Tepe shows up out of nowhere about 12,500 years ago. Skilled artisans carving stone, and there is no earlier record of it, and the people that did it share the same haplogroup, and one of them was destroyed here about 12,500 years ago, and one of them built something amazing here 12,500 years ago. And yet your current Salutarian hypothesis says it goes that way. But I disagree. Another reason we get here, the mound builders of North America. These guys showed up out of nowhere, 1500 BC, your Olmecs, your mound builders. We have them here in Oklahoma, down there in Spiro. We also have a runestone down there. Now we have an overlay of two different cultures that might have traversed up and down this Mississippi corridor, this Appalachian Trail. We have the possibility that there's a transfer of knowledge. This goes back to the Stone Age, but there's enough of an understanding of math and mounds that they can build. The Native Americans can build this in North America. If this is Cahokia, I think it was bigger than London at the time of its height, but these mounds are 72 feet high. 72 is an awfully important number. Every 72 degrees around the world, you have a magnificent world treasure. 72 is the number of months of gestation, the cycles of the season. 72 is a very, very important number. And yet we see it in all of this architecture, these mounds that are built, not only in North America, kind of set back from the rest of the world, but we see it in use in the rest of the world. And it goes back and forth. Here's something else interesting I always like. These are the location of giant skeletons that were unearthed. Now, I don't know if giant skeletons were the UFOs of the 18th century and 19th century, or if they're real. But there's an awful lot of evidence if you will look at it. And look at this concentration And think about that haplogroup. Here had full copper armor. Okay? Now this is the Ohio Hopewell Core, the Chillicothe. Whelk shells, mica, galena from Oklahoma, this area here, knife flint, copper from Michigan. So this area rebuilt itself after this destruction and built this interesting trade network with cultures. Now in New Mexico, you have one of the structures out there, I can't think of the name of it. Lines up with the sun, it lines up with the winter and summer solstices, and you can tell time with it. It has an international trade all the way down to Central America and Brazil. Brazil, the common thought was, hey, there's only been people in the Amazon for about 1,000 years. They now have cave art in the Amazon dated to 12,500 years ago. That seems to be the magic number when everything begins to appear. Now, how would somebody survive this? Well, they'd be out at sea. They'd be on the ocean. They'd be going across to Europe. They'd find a safe harbor somewhere. They would carry this information forward. Now, it's a radical thought to think that maybe our people started here and went over there and then came back. But that's exactly what I'm suggesting. And every day, new evidence is being brought forward. The Native American culture just goes to show you that in this, even at this time frame, these great ancient cultures, this kind of distance was not an issue. Okay? And there was international trade as well. This is the Peterborough runestone, right up there by the Great Lakes, where there's an enormous copper deposit. That is Thor with his hammer, wearing one of the conical hats, four of which stone is not just a small stone the size of this TV. That thing would fill this whole room. And this is in Canada. The unique thing about Vikings is that they filed their teeth in a horizontal pattern. The only other place in the world where you find those teeth filed in a horizontal pattern, hey man, I'm glad you made it. Come on in. Thanks. I'm right in the middle of it. We're at Peterborough. We've destroyed the world already. We've destroyed the world, now we're talking about it all. All right. The Indians around the Great Lakes region, they filed their teeth in a horizontal pattern. Only other place you won't find it. So we look at this from 3500 BC. This is the first sky god. This is Tyr. This is Tiwas, the original possessor of Gungnir. Exactly like the Peterborough stone. These ships, these drawings, are also on the Peterborough stone. And they're both dated 3500 BC. So you have, and they have the name of the king that did it too, servant of Odin. It's a world economy. So there was copper from Michigan, tin from Cornwall, and Egypt and the Mediterranean, they took their copper from Turkey and their tin from Afghanistan. So you destroy one thing, people are going to know where to go. They're not just going to be floating around on a life raft hoping for the best. They're going to know there's a port over here. We can follow this star. I mean, obviously they built enough structures around the world that lined up with this star, that star. They knew true north, they knew east and west, they knew latitude and longitude. If your continent is destroyed and you're at sea, you can find a harbor. And you can bring with you the skill to create some place like Göbekli Tepe. So there's evidence that this stuff existed well before current archaeology suggests it does. This is Solutrean theory that could explain why the Clovis point does not follow the north to south pattern, and more Clovis sites are found on the East Coast than are any part of the USA. That's because this was all destroyed. I mean, anything that might have been here was effectively wiped away. But this suggests that, you have Florida, they most recently found some in a riverbed, some very impressive finds of Clovis points. These Channel Islands are interesting because underneath the black mat there, you have another different culture. This is probably where your Native American is, and it's old. Around San Diego, they found, last summer? They made a discovery building a highway of some kind of human type of tools that were 100,000 years old.
I hear about that.
It's not ridiculous number. So there's entirely possible that there was, you have trade from here all the way up to here. You have trade all along this route, all the way from here, all around here. If this gets destroyed, this entire thing catches on fire, you're going to go the other way. But you don't want to talk about it. This is Storm Brew Hinge. It's on private property. Most people can't get to it. It mirrors the belt of Orion exactly like the pyramids of Egypt. But the belt of Orion was not visible above the horizon at the time this was built. So some flow of information is moving back and forth in ways we can't begin to imagine. It wasn't called Orion at that time either. It is laid out in precise accordance with the megalithic yard and mirrors Egypt. The megalithic yard is equal to 300 Minoan feet. 300 Minoan feet. I can't remember the exact math of it, but that measures up to our meter. It measures up to how they built Stonehenge. The megalithic yard is an important tool that lines up almost all of these great megalithic baths, and it's also what they used in building the capital of this nation. That transfer of knowledge over the centuries, despite destruction, continues, and our lore is a crucial part of that. And the end of the Voluspa, and I love this picture. I put this in here because it's dramatic. This is the mid-oceanic ridge, and there's the Midgard. Even it outlines perfectly. There's Iceland right there's his eye. But that, it's always spewing gas, and that's what kills the order of men. Now, the thing about Ragnarok, if it really did happen back then, and we have lived for as long as we have in that very comfortable zone that's 18 degrees above normal, is that now we see the earth anew, rise all green from the waves again, the cataracts fall, the eagles fly, fish he catches beneath the cliffs. The gods and Ithaval meet together. And of the terrible of girdler of earth they talk. Mighty past they call to mind, and the ancient runes of the ruler of gods. Are we not sitting around these runes and tables, feasting, talking about the girdle of the earth, talking about these runes, talking about these ruler of gods? And wondrous beauty once again shall golden tables stand amid the grass which God had owned in the days of old. The gods had owned in the days of old. Fields unsowed bear ripened fruit. All we've got to do is go to the store and have all the feasting we want. All hills grow better and Balder comes back. We're pretty patient, we're pretty tolerant, pretty high-minded, and more tolerant of other people than we used to be. Balder and Hoth dwell in Grote's battle hall, Valhalla, that is Balder and Hoder, and the mighty gods would yet no more. Honer wins the prophetic wand, and the sons of the brothers to Vigi abide. The gods shall find their wondrous fair, golden tables amid the grass, more fair than the sun. A hall I see, roofed with gold, on Gimli it stands. There shall the righteous rulers dwell, and happiness ever shall they have. Now the last one says, there comes on high, all power and hold, and mighty Lord, all lands he rules. That's Balder. But that, if we look at that destruction, and then we kind of look at our current circumstances, we may have survived that Ragnarok that Voluspa talks about when she first appears of a time long ago. She points the direction to the first cycle. Odin calls her forward, she speaks in the second cycle. Are we in another cycle? Have we already gone through one Ragnarok? Is this legitimate? Can we use this to build the direction we want this faith to go? Can we stand as men again next to each other? And that's the point. We've got to ask each other. If this faith that we're building, we call Asatru, if it cannot provide purpose, guidance, and direction for us to become something more, for us to survive this world, for us to become what we're supposed to become, why are we sitting here spinning our heels? I think that most people that show up here can't see it, can't see the forest for the trees, but they know that inside that forest somewhere there is life. And we're here working on it now. But you've got to remember that these impacts, these movements, this is that crater I was telling you about they found last week, 12,000-year-old impact crater found in Greenland, that serves my purpose even better. Because now that's surely, if you were in Europe, you saw that, but that was the one that was seen. These movements of people around the globe that I presented here, they do not take into account the mind-numbingly huge earthquakes like we saw that created a tidal wave that killed 250,000 people. Tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, which also caused huge migrations of people, collapses of agriculture, disease, extinctions. Literally everything I just mentioned was doubled by these events of Yorn herself. Like I say, we passed through the debris field of these comets which struck Earth twice every year, the Taurid and the Leonid meteor showers. And we have no idea whatsoever what they are composed of. How many, how big, so on and so forth. I think that the resurgence of Asatru, heathenry, paganism among people is that there is the lingering doubt, there's the genetic memory, much like elephants have, or whales have, or any other creature on this earth that can migrate, that we can afford to rely on someone else to take care of these problems for us. The Syria Virgin from Yggdrasil is a reminder, a gentle reminder, but a powerful reminder that our life is our responsibility. So we should live, and we should love to live. And that's all I got, folks, but I appreciate your time. That's a lot of shit to talk about, It's so powerful, I burned up my computer twice. Thank you. If anybody have any questions, I would be happy to answer. Man, glad you showed up, man. I dragged my feet a little bit, but it's all right, man. I'm glad you're here. I got a book for you. I say that train of thought right there is what kicked off the book Life and the Love of Life. The first couple of chapters discuss these things in detail, far more detail than I discussed here. And the presentation I gave last week was about it. I think if we're game, we'll do one next week on Spiritual Journey of a Woman, which is a powerful reminder of the role women play and how exactly that's represented in the Lord. And the responsibilities of men to make sure that beauty that resides inside a woman has what it takes to be expressed safely in the world. But that is one of the things about loving life that I think is crucial. All of y'all are welcome to attend. Any questions? We can make circle and talk
I was
about
gonna
it.
say, I don't think we've got time.
Okay. Yeah, that when Graham Hancock has done an amazing body of research on all of this. But when you look at it, when you see all of these researchers, they write these papers and they argue with each other. Basically, they're writing a letter to argue with the other one, outlining that opinion. But I think one of the most amazing things that's occurring right now is that heathens, Asatruers, pagans, however you want to call them, we're no longer confined to just look at one aspect of it. We can look at this over here, this over here, and this over here, and not be told we're wrong for considering an idea. I could be completely off base, or I could be proved right next week. But it doesn't matter. The point is, we no longer need to get permission from someone to take a good, honest look and appraisal. This body of research, this body of research, this body of research, put them together, because let's face it, folks, this species is headed towards the stars. We're not going to be able to go out there with the prejudices, the ridiculous notions that we have about life. We don't get that right now. I mean, it's just all powerful heritage, history that makes them who and what they are. And I think until each of those cultures begin to thoroughly understand and grasp that, we're going to continue to be bamboozled, hoodwinked, as it were. And that's the standard response most people have when they come out of Christianity. They feel like they've been suckered all their lives. And they have.
Mhm.
But I think there's amazing things on the forefront, but there's also great disaster right around the corner for everything. I mean, this could stop tomorrow. That's literally the world we live in. I mean, but really, truly, that genetic memory is telling all of us we can't wait on someone else to do it for us. And really, truly, we can no longer consider the machinations that the governments are putting towards us as valid. These wars that we're fighting, I mean, a lot of us have served to what end? Good. You know, I'd much rather spend that money going to Mars. And I know somebody's gonna get upset. Why not feed the homeless? Well, that'd be all right. We'll send them to Mars. That's gonna get me in a lot of trouble.
No.
I've got nothing to
It's
lose.
probably I have a theory
Yeah.
that Randy and I have been kind of talking about here lately. Because I have studied, not in the way I'd like to, not as extensively, but different religions and mythologies. And like we were saying earlier, there's so many things in each of them that's the same. And I look at the pagan as kind of one of the oldest ones, and basically what everything else has come off of. And like I told him, you know, people look at those gods and goddesses as just a story, just some imagination that someone come up with, and the rest of us all just go, okay. But they were real. They weren't just a picture in someone's head. These energies come and give this information. Where did they come from? They don't just appear out of the cloud. My theory is that this is entities like we are, maybe in different forms, giants, whatever, that have lived elsewhere. I mean, we put ourselves in a box in our little universe is like right here, but we don't know how vast it is. And they've come in several times, they found physical proof in hieroglyphs and different things throughout, you know, the world and history. And they tell the same things, the same stories, the same gods, goddesses. They've given it different names by the different cultures. It's the same stories where they've come in repeatedly after catastrophes and helped the humans start again, give them the information, give them the tools, give them the education. So,
There is a guy that suggests, and I can't remember his name, but he did suggest that in the lay of Rig, Rig visits great-grandmother, father, grandmother and father, and mother and father. And they invite the divine into their home and their children are successful. He put forth the theory that each visit was subsequent to one of those disasters, as you were talking about. It was that little boost, that little push to move forward. Same thing with the original visit, Odin, Vili, and Vey. But that's a common story that there is some kind of divine intervention, some kind of divine assistance. But when you're talking about us and the beings that we are, if you look at the lore, you'll see all of the gods come from Jotun stock. But you also see each one of these gods deal with some very powerful hindering aspect that their parents are the example of. Especially Tyr. Tyr and Thor go to get the big man, 900 heads she had. I don't know what that all represents, but he didn't like her. No, I don't like her. You know, grandma's got 900 heads stuck in your bed. You couldn't sneak in the house with one head turned around at your ass. But his mother, his divine feminine, his mother, she tried to take care of him. But his father was, if you read that and you think about the big, boorish redneck coming home, stick his hand in his pants, drink a beer, and watch a football game. I mean, that's the image.
stop talking about me like
Then he bored. Then he got scared and cowered in the boat, you know, when he was outdone. If you read those stories, you see these gods very much dealing with the same kind of things we're dealing with. Overcoming those hindrances of our own thought processes we were taught by our parents and their parents and society and a church, setting those very deeply ingrained ideas of how important we think we are to the side so we might become something much more. I think I'm important because blah, blah, blah. Well, shit, I'm still mad at the same stuff he is.
Mhm.
He is. Right? There's a million different experiences we've each had. I may not be able to relate to it all. So this idea that I'm important because I might need to set that aside. And I see that repeated again and again and again in the lore. And I see it culminate in the Way of Rig, where Cone Rig learns the language of the birds, the flows of energy across the world. He learns the runes, and he sheds the cone and becomes Rig himself. Holy cow, it could be more clear to me. We have those abilities. We create the world we want to live in. Our thoughts create the reality we want to live in. If we're waiting on the other shoe to drop, son of a bitch, it's going to drop. You know, but you go into your house, you build your altar, you pay attention to your ancestors, and when you walk into your home, you feel different. You feel different than when you're out in the world. And some people, it's so extreme they become shut-ins. They cannot handle all the stressors that are occurring on the outside world, and so they stay at home. They've created a world they want to live in, and that's it. And I see a lot of heathens do that too, with regards to their spirituality. They find a comfortable place. It's as far as they want to go. And really and truly, if I look at the Lord, I see no limit in what we're capable of achieving. And that means the smithing of ores. That's your science, that's your technology, that's your understanding, that's, you know, learning these languages. But it's these limiting ideas of the love of gold, the bewitching of men mind, the horse thief, that the thing that robs us of the ability to work together, that keeps us from doing more. That's kind of what I think about that. I mean, I think you're right on the money in a lot of ways. I think we have the ability to become something much more magnificent. It may not happen right now, but when we cross that threshold, when hell gives us one of her faces, who knows what it's going to look like? But I don't have to fear that anymore. And for the longest time, so many of us were told that's a terrifying idea. It's going to hurt. Blah, blah, blah. Well, shit, man. You know, who knows? But there's a freedom in it that I think we need to embrace in a lot more. And I don't need to be angry about it to do it. That's not.
No, because when we work from anger, we create our own blocks and keep
Oh, hell
ourselves
yeah,
from
we
growing.
put the blocks in front of us we put the roadblocks in front of us on the road every time. It's our thought process that puts it on. And how hard is it to get to work on Monday morning when you hate your job?
Mhm.
How hard is it to walk out the door when you walk behind your wife's pissed off at you? I mean, it's not a good thing. Your home ain't right, man. When you walk out that front door, the rest of it's probably gonna suck.
Mhm.
But at any rate, that's the thing, is that as we discuss this, as we talk about it, even we just look at all that, yeah, we got some validity, yeah, there's a lot of things we got to overcome, but through all that destruction, these ideas, this lore, this idea that our minds might, all of the roots of the human potential movement, of the success series, of all of these, people that sell this idea of success, the roots of all of that can be found in the information that moved through all of those disasters. It can be found in our Lord. It can be found again and again. And I don't care if he says too Christianized or not. I see something in there. It's what we have to work with. And I see something in there that I have seen people use to great effects to become something great.
I read a lot, and I read, and I have only realized it in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm reading, looking for that information and that commonality in popular fiction and all kinds of other things, and I'm seeing it come out more now that more women are writing and able to but it's everywhere. The idea of who we are.
Yeah, the hero's journey.
Yes, and just that it's empowering, I think, and self-empowering, that it's not some judge or somebody that's different than us. It's us. It's us, and it's always been us, you know what I mean? And it just keeps on going and coming back around, and that's natural. It's not unnatural, not of us, or we're not of it. So.
Steve McAllen brought that up when he brought out metagenetics, and it was misconstrued in a lot of ways, but that's kind of what he was pointing out, that there's a genetic memory, like elephants or whales or dolphins, And I don't think it's for, hell, it may be for us to go to a place. You know what I mean? It might be, at the very least, it may represent that moral compass this world sorely needs. And everybody has it, every race, every creed, every culture, they all have it. Their outcomes are all gonna be different than ours. But who's to say that each one of those outcomes doesn't represent a component of a machine that we need to move forward into space? Who knows? You know, but who's to say? It's a wonderful possibility. Now all of a sudden, there's a reason to love life again. But I think what you're talking about, when I wrote Spiritual Journey of a Woman, I know that sounds funny, but I talked with 4 women to it. One was a licensed clinical social worker. One was a woman that had grown exponentially through recovery. One of them is the leader of her she's the wife of the leader of a large spiritual organization. And one of them was my wife. And I would write something on my perspective of it, and they would look through it and they said, "No, you're stupid." But what came out of that was that in most of these scenarios is that, take Frey for instance. Frey sacrificed a sword that was so powerful it could defeat any enemy, could fight at its own accord. He sacrificed that very powerful phallic symbol of masculinity, the warrior aspect of a man. He sacrificed that. He gave it to the younger generation so he could create an environment where the woman he would wish to be with would feel at home and welcome. He created an environment. He still knew everything he needed to be a warrior. I mean, he fights Surtur with an nail candle at the end of time. I mean, that's a bad dude. But he still creates an environment where a woman might feel safe to express the beauty of who she is. And I think that a large part of what you're talking about, the world is really missing that. Where can you find in the world an environment where a woman is free to express who and what she is? The beauty of who she is. And I think the world desperately needs the beauty of a woman's heart. Jord, Gerder, Frigga, Freya, Scotty. Scotty is this wonderful tale of how a father may not have necessarily created in his daughter that wonderful feeling she needed to be able to express who she is. And she picked a mate on only one aspect of it, and it failed. That's just one level. I mean, The Spiritual Journey of a Woman is one of those books that bring you to tears. But
Aspect of that, straightforward. I mean, it's out here now, but still, from woman to woman and little word here and there and a little story there.
mothers
Thrown
and
in the
sisters.
popular kind of
Yes.
thing, and then it's just like, it's there, but it's just been hidden for a long time, so
It's
it's
been-
great that it's able to, in
been
some
vilified.
societies, come out.
It's been vilified.
Yeah.
Women, the idea of beauty is that women are not allowed to be sisters to each other until they become older. Women,
Right.
we're older.
There are, in the workforce, I actually wrote a paper, for psychology class, whenever I was taking psychology classes, about the competitiveness of women in the workplace, that we nowhere in there were we supporting each other. We were acting like housewives, fighting over men, you know what I mean? Literally,
Yeah, in one way or
and it's
another,
like, we
fighting for
need to
approval.
not do that. We need to do what men do. Let's network. I mean, not that men don't fight, but don't be catty with each other all the time. And let's get out of that old mindset and be where we are now. But
It's such a challenge, and it's really an alien thought process that I'm not saying that, please don't take this incorrectly. It is an alien thought process for a woman in those situations. I mean, it is hard to be in a man's world, in the business world. It is hard to be in a man's world in many ways. Or say, here's a child that they're thinking about, and they're all protecting that, it becomes dangerous. That's just all there is to it. What would happen if we were to shed those boundaries? What would happen if we were to create an environment where women were allowed to be creative, were allowed to express love? They still fight, but
and
what
allowed
would come out of
to
it?
have to share power with men. I mean, to be equal.
That
Literally, I know that's not easy to do.
I think that goes back to society, not only society and over the years of women being kept per se.
It's monotheism.
And right, and it's a generational thing, I think, it's how, that parent was raised by that parent, down and down. I mean, I was in an abusive marriage, and my grandmother was like, you have food, you have a roof over your head, you have clothes on your back, you keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
And so it's a very generational thing for that, for women, you keep your mouth shut. Now, I mean, I used to be in real estate, I would go into cigar bar and I would make out with checks from my bankers.
Mhm.
I can play with men and I can play with women.
See, that's the equality aspect is a unique thing. That is, and that's addressed with Odin and Frigg too. I mean, she knows everything he does. She controls every bit as much as he does. And he is the one he asks the opinion of when he goes to risk his head with a giant in a competition of wisdom. We haven't fostered that idea of what, when we sacrificed those traditional ceremonies of man and woman making, and we gave those up for the convenience of monotheism and allowed someone else to do it else for us, we also sacrificed those very critical ideas of understanding between the yin and the yang, the immovable force and the unstoppable force. We sacrificed the idea of what those roles should be around each other. In the arranged marriages of the past, they understood those roles. There were contracts drawn up. You're going to act this way, you're going to act this way. Y'all are going to get along and build a kingdom. And build a kingdom is the important part of it. We sacrificed all of that. And now we're all sitting here going, shit, I know she can do it, but maybe, I don't know. Can I do it? And then you go and outdo somebody who was raised with the idea that women need to be seen and not heard. You need to, now we have entire cultures where they hide who you are. And look at the poison that faith has brought upon the world. Both of them, hell, all three of them. So yeah, we have a lot to learn. But my gosh, think about what you just said. Think about what you were just able to express. How far have we come? I mean, what are we looking for? What's our future going to be like when your daughter grows up understanding who and what she is, when my daughter grows up to understand who and what she is?
My granddaughter's gonna be scary. Take
Oh,
it one more and she's gonna be
We have
scary.
3 granddaughters.
See, here's
There's several there.
Here's the thing about that is if I have that in my home, I will defend that savagely. In no uncertain terms. You know that. That's because that's my role. I will defend that savagely. It says it on the Army drill sergeant badge, this will defend, and I feel like it means something to me. So that's.
My main point, I guess, is that what you're talking about here, this just makes perfect sense to me. This is starting to put things together in a way that is out in the open in one place and not having to cut through little tons of reading to find things that
I encourage you to pick up that book.
I think that's a great idea.
I'll have more ideas sometimes, literally.
I think the 30th or the 4th is supposed to be here. Yeah. But yeah, that's what that book was. It's anyway. Here. But see, these kind. I think the neatest thing is that all of us are so different in our world, where we come from, what we do. But here we are sitting here, going, holy shit, man! There's something here. There's something neat. And a lot of it we don't want to let it go. We're not going to sacrifice it. We're going to defend it. We'll see what comes out of it. And that's the neat thing. And that's the danger, because it is a true threat to everything that is made this. Yeah, this is illegal. 20 years ago, we'd have been laughed out of countenance. Look at us now.
Got a tickle about that.
Yeah, look at us now.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that.
Do you like Wednesday?